What is up, Bitcoiners? It is your boy CK, and I had an awesome conversation with Craig Warmke, Professor Craig Warmke. He is a professor of philosophy, and he is into Bitcoin. He is one of the few out there who is really diving deep into this nascent technology and thinking, what does it do to humans? What does it have to do with philosophy? Why is Bitcoin good? This is a really wide-ranging conversation, and we talked about a ton of different things, ranging from Tesla, pumping their Bitcoin bags, all the way to, why mom and dad, why people are going to adopt Bitcoin. I really enjoyed this one, and I think you guys will too. Before we get into the interview, though, I want to tell you about the Bitcoin 2021 conference. You guys, June 3rd, 4th, and 5th in Miami, Florida. It is going to be an absolutely amazing time. We are announcing speakers on speakers on speakers every single day. Just today, we announced Alex Gladstein. And by the time you guys listen to this podcast, that is going to be old news. We are at the Miami Manna Wynwood venue. It is one of the coolest venues in one of the coolest parts of the city. And it is going to be absolutely bonkers. There's going to be skate ramps. There's going to be epic speakers like Michael Saylor. You got to be there. It is going to be a complete Bitcoin takeover in the city of Miami, and you are not going to want to miss it. Use promo code Satoshi to save 10% off. Go to b.tc/conference. Get your tickets there. Check out all the speakers there. And again, promo code Satoshi, save 10% off. See you in Miami. Enjoy this podcast with Craig Warmke. What is up, Bitcoiners? Welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Magazine podcast. I am sitting across screen from Professor Craig Warmke. Craig, welcome to the Bitcoin Magazine podcast.
Christian, thank you. I've been listening to your podcast for a while. I'm a big fan, so it's nice to chat with you here today.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan as well. I discovered you because of Twitter, the great kind of, I guess, information propagation system that us Bitcoiners are using at large these days. But, as soon as I discovered your account, I started diving into the work you're publishing and some of your tweets, and I invited you onto the Bitcoin Magazine Happy Hour. And after that, it was pretty evident that I needed to bring you onto the show for a proper interview. So I'm really excited to just, find out, more about yourself. Academics who are in Bitcoin, academics that are into philosophy that are in Bitcoin are few and far between. But, to Bitcoiners, Bitcoin and philosophy is, it's two peas in a pod. So I kind of want to learn more, just, how you came to Bitcoin, how, what is your story?
Oh, good questions. So I did my PhD in philosophy at UNC Chapel Hill, and I started working here at Northern Illinois University several years ago. But a few years ago, this was late 17, early 2018, I got caught up in the hype, and I was interested in whether Bitcoin was a bubble or not, whether it would succeed through the mania. And so I started looking into it. What could it offer the world? What was it doing? How did it work? And I'd say within a few weeks, I just found it so compelling. I thought I should devote some research time to it. And so when the semester ended, I started to write. And so I've written a few papers, and several months after that, I found some friends. I mean, these are friends I've known for several years, but I didn't know really that they were as into Bitcoin as I was. And so their names are Andrew Bailey and Bradley Rettler. They're also philosophers. So you're right, there are very few philosophers who have any interest in Bitcoin, but we are three of them, and that's probably most of us. And we put up our work on this website called Resistance.money. And we've been writing about several different issues. Individually, I've been writing about what Bitcoin is and how it works. And then with him, we've been writing about whether Bitcoin is overall good, and the ways in which it's good, and the ways in which its goodness trumps the trade-offs.
I guess there's kind of multiple ways where we can take this, but
Yeah.
I would like to hear, like, what's your kind of explanation for why is Bitcoin good, and from I guess a philosophical perspective, why the world needs Bitcoin.
Yeah. So, well, I will start with a bit of a story here. So, in the Crypto Anarchy Manifesto by Tim May, the last paragraph, he discusses barbed wire. And actually, I'm in DeKalb, Illinois, which is where modern barbed wire was invented. And so this paragraph really strikes a chord with me. But barbed wire, according to Tim May, was this way of protecting your property rights, your land, some of your belongings. And he says that cryptography is a way to undo the metaphorical barbed wire that surrounds intellectual property. So whereas physical barbed wire protects physical property, May thought that one of the primary uses of cryptography was to demolish intellectual property and make it free for everyone. But I think if he were alive right now, he recently passed, I think he would grant that there's another way in which cryptography is very useful. And that's that cryptography also protects information in a similar kind of way that barbed wire protects land. Cryptography can provide like a kind of insurmountable wall that protects information from the outside world. And I think that's a good thing for people to have the power to selectively reveal parts of themselves so that they aren't revealing everything about themselves to everyone in the world all the time. And the way I think that's beneficial, or the reason I think that's beneficial, is because our payments reveal our preferences. What we pay for reveals something deep about us, our desires, everything from the charities that we give to the people that we're connected to, the people that we love, the stores that we frequent, all sorts of things. And so one way in which Bitcoin, I think, is overall good is that it gives people this privacy enhancing power. Of course, it's not perfectly good at protecting privacy. It's not anonymous, but it does help people to enhance their privacy. I think it will in the future. I think it will continue to. And it'll help people selectively reveal their preferences that are otherwise revealed in their payments to other people. And those payments right now, they are spied on and sold to other companies. These are the trusted third parties that serve as checkpoints and central authorities. So without those, I think that Bitcoin can enhance our privacy. And I think it's an overall good thing, even though privacy, of course, is also helpful to criminals and people do very, very bad things. But I think right now, if you look at the way that the U.S. dollar is used to fund criminal activity, it's much more percentage-wise than what Bitcoin is used. Bitcoiners know this, and the criminal activity that people engage in through Bitcoin will only increase. That's my prediction over the next several years, because criminals prefer very liquid forms of payment. Once they're once they get money, they want to be able to offload it without being found. And having a big source of liquidity is very useful. So as Bitcoin becomes even more liquid, I think it'll be used for more criminal activity, but it won't be used for much more criminal activity. This is my view, than the U.S. dollar. So like privacy is one way in which I think it's overall good. Another is censorship resistance. Lots of people around the world. They live under totalitarian governments. These governments and even corporations, maybe under the watchful eye of their governments, they have the power to block transactions, shut down accounts, and so on. And I think having an escape valve, an escape route for people is valuable. I mean, I think a lot of the pushback I've gotten from fellow academics about Bitcoin, and this is, I think, ironic. It literally stems from a kind of Anglo-centric perspective where all they see about Bitcoin is the rising price and the speculative nature of it in the U.S. markets. They don't see these other things because they don't know. And so one of the things that Andrew and Brad and I want to do is we want to show people that there's more to Bitcoin than its price. Of course, that's a good thing, and we think that plays a role in the censorship resistance and the privacy and so on, making it to more people's hands. But insofar as what academics need to know, we think that they would be better off if they knew about how the Bitcoin network worked, how it provided censorship resistance, enhanced privacy, though not perfect privacy, in certain ways to include people financially that otherwise might have not great access to financial products.
So I think this is actually an interesting direction to take. I'm actually surprised by how much you're honing in on Bitcoin's tangible features. Where like a lot of times when I think of like the philosophy behind Bitcoin, I'm like, Bitcoin is sound money, and how does sound money affect human action move that adopts it, right? And then what happens when a society adopts sound money? And of course, it needs all of the kind of like specific features that you're honing in on in order to like ultimately produce that final sound money product on the internet, which Bitcoin, is trying to be, is competing to be. I'm kind of curious, like when you think about big philosophy around Bitcoin and kind of like the bigger picture, I get what's kind of your point of view there?
Oh, well, this is such a wide open question. So let me put it this way, and a lot of my thoughts here owe to Brad and Andrew because we talk every day, and our thoughts, we have like a mind meld. Our thoughts kind of bleed in, so they're probably responsible for some of these thoughts. But so on the one hand, I think having a sound money option is very good, and I think that sound money option is very important to the sort of justice that Bitcoin can provide to the world. Why would that be? Well, I think that Satoshi was not only a good engineer when it comes to distributed systems, and just a good engineer generally. I also think he was a good social theorist, and that he understood how people worked. So suppose Satoshi had used a 20% inflation rate instead of the disinflationary rate that he did use. Would people have bought in? Even if it were just, all the other properties the same, would people have bought in? Would you have wanted any?
It's hard to tell if anyone would pay attention if number wasn't going up.
Yes.
For whatever reason.
Number has to go up. Number go up is the core value proposition of Bitcoin when it comes to people like us. If number didn't go up, we wouldn't buy in. And if we didn't buy in, we wouldn't have access to freedom money. So Satoshi, I think, knew that we are greedy little creatures. We want number go up. And the only way to do this is to have either a very low inflation rate or a disinflationary rate, or something like a limited supply maximum cap from the very beginning. I think that, of course, um, the 10-minute blocks, the 21 million. I mean, these were arbitrary numbers. Other numbers would have done just as well. But having a maximum supply with a disinflationary rate, that's what motivates people to buy in. And then having bought, they have access to this censorship resistant privacy enhancing money. And so I think that the rising price, it can put some academics off, because to them, I think a lot of them, they don't, especially philosophers, they don't like to talk about money openly. And Bitcoin, if they don't know how it works, it looks like a Ponzi scheme. Like, it looks like, from what they see, a lot of people are buying in so that they can sell at a higher price and make a profit, and they just want to sell to the next idiot down the line. And I think this is a mistaken view of Bitcoin's value proposition. Yes, of course, the price is going up, but Satoshi designed it that way so that we buy in, so he could give us something that's even more valuable, which is money that inhabits a distributed network that's censorship resistant, global, borderless, and so on.
Yeah, I love how you broke that down, but effectively, Bitcoin is a higher order, a level values system, kind of disguised as a get rich quick scheme. And
Yes.
Ansel Lindner, my co-host of FedWatch, he said it really well multiple times. Bitcoin aligns incentives. Like, Satoshi understood human incentives so well that he created a system that kind of struck at the chord of human incentives perfectly to some degree. Would you agree with that?
I do. I mean, so I have some favorite philosophers, or at least some favorite intellectuals, people who've produced work in human history. One of them is Bach. Bach. I mean, I conceive of him as an intellectual, not a philosopher, but he produced massive amount of beautiful music in almost near anonymity. I mean, no one really knew about him, and no one really appreciated his work until after he was gone. And so I really appreciate that about Bach. I think Bach serves as a role model in this way. It's not about the ego for Bach. Another one is Leibniz. Leibniz is actually their lives overlapped around the same time, around the same area of Europe. And this is in the 17th century, around Germany. Leibniz, of course, invented the calculus, and he was at heart a philosopher, but he just developed these beautiful systems and could systematize just a vast amount of information and make it into a coherent, plausible story. Satoshi is another one, and I think Satoshi is probably still alive. But I think that Satoshi's mind is on this kind of level. So someone who's very special, who, one, doesn't care about the ego like Bach, and two, has this kind of beautiful way of constructing something out of different parts in an elegant way, like Leibniz. And so I have a lot of respect for Satoshi, and another way in which Satoshi was very smart is just in the way that you mentioned. He understood how humans worked. He knew what makes them tick, and I think that even if 100 years from now, something's happened to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin as we know it doesn't really exist anymore, the main ideas within Bitcoin will. And I think that Satoshi will have this sort of reputation as a thinker that many philosophers think that Leibniz deserves. And I think my colleagues and several people in the philosophy world would be, I think, shocked to hear me say that. They think, what are you talking about? But I just don't think they know. I mean, I think that Satoshi deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for the way that he will eventually have helped people save money, escape poverty, flee totalitarian regimes, and protect their savings from irresponsible monetary and fiscal policies. I think that he deserves the Nobel Prize in economics for the way that he constructed this kind of distributed monetary network which protects against hyperinflation. And I also think he deserves something like the Turing Award in computer science for the very same reason, solving this issue about coming to consensus when there are people you can't trust on the network. So Satoshi, I think, is a very special person and one whose work I've found a lot of inspiration in.
I want to talk about, something that you've mentioned several times, which is like your colleagues, your fellow academics, especially in philosophy. It's not unheard of that status quo academics miss something by 20, 30 years and then finally acknowledge it when it's just, obvious. It's undeniable at that point. I mean, this, you could talk about antibiotics as a case, and then maybe you can talk about Bitcoin as being the case. To this day, I still think that the majority of academia shuns it, has absolute disgust for it, or just no respect. And then here you are saying Satoshi should win every prize at the same time. So like how can you try to explain this gap here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of it has to do with sociological factors and in academia and how academics work and what the incentives are. Speaking of incentives. So let's get the obvious explanations out of the way, which are true, and they partially explain Bitcoin's reputation among academics. So one, there's a political stink. So Bitcoin undoubtedly grew out of the cypherpunks. And the cypherpunks were largely libertarians and crypto anarchists. In contemporary academia, these political ideologies are radical. They're radical, and not the right kind of radical. So many academics are radical, but not that kind. And so Bitcoin has a bit of a political and ideological stink on it, which prevents people from looking at it in the first place. The second explanation, which is, I think, fairly obvious, is that Bitcoin is relatively new. I mean, it's only 12 years old, and philosophers especially, but academics in general, they move slowly. They have academic projects that can span 4 to 5 years, and a lot of them just don't work in areas that touch on Bitcoin. And so specific questions about Bitcoin, they haven't achieved any sort of Lindy effect. So especially for philosophy, questions that we work on, philosophers have been working on for thousands of years. And so they have a kind of respect as respectable questions to work on that are worth devoting your life towards answering. And since Bitcoin has only been around for 12 years, it's impossible for it to have this kind of reputation. And so maybe several hundred years from now, there will be whole departments devoted to, not Bitcoin specifically, but questions that relate to Bitcoin. I think that's possible. I mean, my hope is that within the next 10 years, someone with deep pockets would fund like a interdisciplinary research center in this way, and that could happen. But those are the two kind of obvious explanations. But there's a third one that I think maybe some non-academics may not realize, and that's this: that Bitcoin is, in essence, multidisciplinary. Okay, in order to understand it and how it works, it's like opening up the pantry. You have to pull down some computer science, some economics, some mathematics, some philosophy. And nowadays, that's not how academics work. That's not how the sausage is made. And why is that? Right now, everyone has an incentive to hyper specialize. Why? It's either publish or perish. You've probably heard that. Well, it's hard to publish creative new ideas on big questions quickly. And so what do? You shrink the problem and down to the smallest problem you can possibly shrink it into, and then you write a paper. And so, so if you think of like the knowledge that that is like swirling around in the ivory towers as a kind of tree, you can't just grab onto like a big branch. You have to go all the way to the tippy top, to the little twig off the twig, and say, okay, that's my spot. Because otherwise you won't be able to produce the work. And this kind of hyper specialization, and just like sociological, historical factors, really began in earnest in the mid 20th century when, this is kind of bizarre, but the US government gave a lot of money to colleges and universities to hire extra academics because they wanted to outcompete other countries in the world. And so, and this was a very, special time for academia. It was like probably like the golden age, because the way I see things now, things are kind of in decline. And part of the reason they're in decline where I am is that people hyper specialize, and it's very uninteresting. And because these small questions, the smaller the question that you're tackling, the less likelihood that it will matter to anyone. And I think this is definitely true in philosophy. If people knew the kinds of questions that philosophers worked on, I think people wouldn't want to have their taxes go towards it. Okay. And so
Craig,
yes.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
yeah.
Really what you're saying is that what's the word I'm blanking on right now? But subsidies create misallocation of capital, which creates the incentive for academics to hyper specialize rather than thinking more big picture. And if you were to talk about Bitcoin, I would say that Bitcoin, in order to understand Bitcoin, you must take on the characteristics of a polymath. Like you just said, it takes a little bit of everything. And hey, I majored in communications, but I did a minor in business. I did research in open source software development and communication. Strangely, I had the cocktail that made me multidisciplinary enough to grok Bitcoin. Yeah. But if you're hyper specialized, it's very, very difficult, because you're right. Like Bitcoin in any one circle is uninteresting, right? Especially even super hard on the tech circle, it's uninteresting. That's why you see these tech geniuses all into altcoins, because they want to do this complex thing, but they are missing the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And there's in academia, there is a lot of missing the point. Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? For a lot of people, it's, to write these small papers to get a paycheck. Or write these papers, talk with their friends who write these small papers, and then get a paycheck. And I think I mean, so of course, this doesn't apply to everyone. There are special cases everywhere. But you're exactly right that it's the perverse incentive structure that explains why things are the way they are here. And it takes real risks for academics to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore. I want to work on something that's interesting, and I'm gonna have to learn some new areas of inquiry. And that's both dangerous and exciting, and also time consuming and risky. Um, so, so for example, when I chose to jump ship from what I was doing to devote most of my time to Bitcoin, I was only halfway through my tenure clock, meaning that I only had 3 more years to produce enough work in order to hopefully earn tenure. But this means that I had to devote all this time to learning before I could write. So that was risky, and that's a risk that anyone would have to bear in order to, leave their research projects and then start something new, if they're already firmly entrenched in a job. And then beyond that, you suffer, I think, reputational risk. So I think that most philosophers would probably think that I'm out to lunch. They would probably wrongly think that I'm like a radical right winger because I'm interested in Bitcoin, and so these are the risks, and this is why it's so valuable to find people like Andrew and Brad, who will collaborate and answer these questions with you. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's the perverse incentive structures that puts obstacles in front of people who might otherwise be interested. And I think our best hope is, other than time, which I think will heal many wounds here, is to find young academics, maybe who haven't finished yet, and say, you should work on Bitcoin. And so that they can start from the very beginning, and they don't have to risk things like, not having enough publications to get tenure.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I mean, absolutely pivoting during tenure, I could see as being a very, very stressful thing. I penciled in a question here just because I assumed you had thought a lot about philosophy, a lot more than me. And then maybe you kind of thought about what a world run on Bitcoin would look like. I feel I asked this question a lot, I
Yeah.
guess, but I sense that you might be someone who is strangely qualified to answer.
Oh, well, probably not. But let me think one step back. And since I mentioned Leibniz before, I'll tell a Leibniz story to kind of work into what I'll say. So Leibniz, in my view, is one of the smartest people who's ever lived. He probably made more contributions to more academic fields than anyone since Aristotle. But he understood people very well, in the same kind of way that Satoshi understood people. The way that Leibniz understood people is he knew not to throw pearls before swine. And so Leibniz was an idealist in the philosophical sense, not like just being optimistic, although he was optimistic. But I mean, he thought that the material reality was a kind of simulation, that we all inhabited a kind of coordinated dream world, kind of like the Matrix, except if you unplugged, you wouldn't see anything because there's no further physical reality behind it. We're all just kind of immaterial minds, and God feeds us. God has endowed us with sensations that coordinate everything. It's really wild. But he didn't want to tell people this. Many of his correspondents were like Catholic theologians who were emotionally invested in their view of the world, which included the view that there were mind-independent physical objects, the kind of view that most of us have. And in correspondence, Leibniz would rarely, ever, with them, directly reveal what his overall views were. He would take note first of what their views were, and then he would think, okay, how do I get them one step closer from where they are to where I am? And then he would give the argument to go one step closer from where they were to where he was. He wouldn't just reveal the whole system and try to help them cross the bridge the whole way at once, just one step at a time. Okay, so why am I telling the story? Well, so many Bitcoiners think one of several things, which I think has a tendency to put off people in the wider public. One might be libertarianism, another might be crypto anarchy, another might be the idea that we're going to hyper Bitcoinize, in that fiat is, filthy, dirty fiat is a thing of the past, and we're not going to have any of it. And I wish more Bitcoiners took Leibniz's strategy and saying, okay, what do you think? What are your problems? Okay, let's take you one step closer to where we are. And so that one step closer might be, we're losing financial privacy to corporations who have no interest in protecting our privacy, and in fact have every incentive to broadcast the things that we buy to the entire world. That's a bad thing. That's a problem that Bitcoin fixes. Some people in the world, because of their political or religious views, they can't open a bank account, or their money gets confiscated, or. Bitcoin fixes this. And it doesn't have to totally replace fiat. It doesn't have to, we don't have to say that everything is going to hyper Bitcoinize or have fun staying poor, even though I do think that's funny. But I think that we can market Bitcoin in an intellectual way by just noting these incremental improvements over the system that we already have. Okay, now having said that, what do I think about the future? Well,
specifically a world run on Bitcoin.
A world run on Bitcoin.
What does that do to human action? From a philosopher's perspective. And I really like how you built that up, and I agree. Gigi once told me, chill lightly, and I feel like that's what you just said in a very in a very roundabout way.
Yeah, good. Well, I partly go through this because I don't know how likely it is that the world will run on Bitcoin. I'm skeptical about that. I'm not as skeptical as I was. I had a chat recently with Drew, who said some pretty compelling things about how the world might go. And I'm less skeptical than I was, I'll say that. But I just don't see this happening in our lifetimes. I think that fiat will be around for a while, and I think people will be happy to pay their taxes. Now, let's say, well, forget how unlikely you think it is. What if it happened? Would it be good or bad? And I had to say, I don't know. And I want to say I don't know for a couple of different reasons. One, I'm not an economist, and I'm not a psychologist. And if I were to issue judgments about this, without prefacing it by saying, like, who knows? I don't know. I would be an epistemic trespasser. I've I've honed my skills and tools on the territory of philosophy, and it's I should be embarrassed if I trot on over to the territory of economics or psychology and just issue claims like I had honed my skills over there, which I hadn't. And so okay, so I don't know, and I think it's unlikely, and my opinion isn't very valuable, but what is it? And I I'm actually very torn about this. I'm actually very torn. So
I can tell.
yeah, so I mean, economists will say that a low rate of inflation is good, because it compels people. To pay for things which greases the skids of the economy. And do I know that that's false? No. So much of it depends on human psychology and material that I haven't read. I just can't say. So the question then is, would a non-inflationary or disinflationary currency be such that the economy would come to a grinding halt, precisely because this oil that was previously greasing the skids is no longer around? And I suspect not, because we don't live forever. We still want to consume things. We have desires. And so we're still going to pay for things, but would it slow down the economy? I don't know that either. I just don't know. I mean, I think I can speak to my personal experience. I began pricing things in Bitcoin for myself. I mean, it took a long time, but it was this last price increase where I began to think of the opportunity cost of buying things instead of buying Bitcoin. And okay, I mean, I haven't paid for a haircut in years. I haven't bought clothes in years or shoes. And so if more people were like me, would shoemakers and clothes makers and barbers be out of business? I don't know. Do you have an opinion on this?
Well, I mean, if fiat didn't exist, would academics be out of business? Because clearly the subsidies are allowing them to do things that are economically not viable. So
Yeah.
who knows how deep the misallocation of capital runs? And
Good.
if that's your standard of what you want to preserve, then yeah, Bitcoin's deflationary money is going to wreck a lot of shit. But
Yeah.
ultimately, I think the one this is a matter of time preference, right? The one thing that's more scarce than Bitcoin is time for
Yeah.
each individual human. So that scarcity is going to push you to allocate Bitcoin to live, to water, food, etc., shelter. But even more than that is like self-actualization. But
Yeah.
now, hopefully, you can actually allocate capital effectively and at
Yeah.
least actualize appropriately. I don't know. That'd be my take.
Yeah. Good. I mean, so here are some questions that I would worry about under this kind of hyper Bitcoinized world. One, there will always be the poor, and will they be taken care of?
I mean, does the state take care of the poor well right now?
It's a good
And what's
question.
the cost of that care?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. But do we know what would happen to the poor under hyper Bitcoinization?
I guess you could historically look back and see other times, but I don't know. Like that's a
Yeah.
that's a big question mark.
Yeah. I mean,
Are the poor
so
being taken care of well right now? This again,
yeah.
where are we now? And
Yeah.
why are we fearing the future? Granted, our current present state.
Yeah, I mean, so but these are the hard questions. The hard questions that I don't think, I mean, at least I don't know the answer to them. What would happen to, yeah. So go back to, let's see, 4th, 5th century, Constantinople. Probably they had pretty sound money, precious metal, stamped coins, gold, silver. And religious people took care of the poor, and the crippled. So, hospitals, orphanages, religious people did a lot of the work, not the state authorities. If in a hyper Bitcoinized world, the government lost its ability to take care of the poor, other people would have to step in. And are there enough giving people, charitable people, who would do that?
I mean, like, again, like these are the hard questions, right? Like, my base assumption is that Bitcoin is a human's values delivery system. I've made several comparisons to religion, and I mean, it's just difficult to say, like, here's the percentage of charitable people today, and then reflect that to potentially how many charitable people would be in a Bitcoinized world. It's just like the money is so deeply tied into human action, in my opinion, and the quality of the money and the features of the money, that I think that human action would be completely transformed. So, I mean, I don't know. It just makes it really hard to forecast, I guess, other than me just being hyper bullish. So that's just my default state.
No, I mean, these are totally different questions. There's one question. Will number go up? And I think we both agree that's nearly inevitable. And then there's this other question: if it goes up enough and the world hyper Bitcoinizes, what are the trade-offs? I think we have to admit that there are trade-offs. It's not going to be, it cannot be a perfect world, because if Bitcoin is as good of money as we say it is, people will want to steal it. People want to hurt other people to get it. And that alone will present issues within a hyper Bitcoinized world. But what are the other trade-offs? And I don't know. I mean, I think you're probably right about some of the benefits. But I think the trade-offs might be hard. I mean, are there any projects that taxes provide that we wouldn't be able to provide under hyper Bitcoinization, which are good things? I think some people would say no.
Bitcoiners might say that.
Yeah. But there probably are some good things. But yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's really hard to wrap your mind around, like, what this Bitcoin world's going to look like. I personally think that number will go up. It's inevitable. It's just math, as Greg Foss would say. And with that being said, like, will it be possible to resist? And if it is truly superior for economic calculations, then at some point it just becomes a no-brainer for people just to switch over, just because it's a better system, right? We've seen that happen with other systems where it's like, one system is clearly better. Having a zero instead of Roman numerals is clearly better. People dropped Roman numerals like they were hot, just because it offered an advantage. And I feel like Bitcoin is that kind of level of advantage. So that's why, I don't know, like, we won't have a choice. Like, that Bitcoin world is happening. Is it going to be good, bad, worse? I would say that maybe you can disagree or agree with me on this, but the trajectory of humans is that we're making life better for ourselves, exponentially. And there's peaks and valleys, but the trajectory is improved quality of life, improved lifespan, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that seems right. I mean, as Bitcoin gains steam here, I do think that other projects will pop up, and maybe some of them already have, which will have a non-negligible percentage of the market share, and that will be good for Bitcoin. I think that's good. Another because this is so it's good in two ways. One way, it's another competitor for Bitcoin to slay. And as long as Bitcoin has competitors to slay, it'll get stronger. Two, these competing projects, they serve as what you might think of as regulatory diversions. So as so like, you know, some of these trick plays, like in football, you know, you can pretend you're giving the ball, handing off the ball to one guy and another guy and another guy, and you really give it to this other guy. That's Bitcoin, the one who really has the ball. But then all the defensive players are trying to tackle the other guys. And I think that's going to be that has been happening for several years now, and it will continue to happen as governments go after projects that try to separate themselves from Bitcoin. And in separating themselves from Bitcoin, they break laws. You know, they violate, you know, SEC laws and so on. Yeah.
They also make Bitcoin like the counterexample of like not breaking laws, right? Like they justify Bitcoin. I actually have the exact same opinion about altcoins as you.
Yes.
I believe that altcoins are part of Bitcoin, and that if there's kind of two things here, it's like Bitcoin and then the Hydra of shit. And the Hydra of shit is just constantly DDoSing regulators.
Yes.
It's a constant DDoS. And honestly, it's like the general confusion is what Bitcoin thrives in, because Bitcoin is anti-fragile by nature, right? So confusion is a healthy competitive state for Bitcoin to dominate, which I think is commencing, and it's only being you know, further you know, amplified by the altcoins for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there are these psychological studies on how we can manipulate people's choices by the choices that we give them. And I think that this is the way in which the altcoin market is doing that to the regulators. It's you know, do you want to regulate this thing or this thing, which is much worse in comparison? It's their job to regulate this thing. They have to choose to do that. And so Bitcoin is always going to look comparatively pretty good to those things. So those are two ways in which altcoins are good. But here's another reason why I think that Bitcoin can be successful, in which and a reason why at the same time I think that hyper Bitcoinization it might be unlikely. It's a competitor to fiat currencies, and competition is good because it disciplines competitors. So as central banks and governments see Bitcoin succeeding for the reasons that it succeeds, they will have to discipline themselves for fear of being obsoleted. Okay, now if that's right, Bitcoin is a huge success. It improves the world all the way around just because it motivates people to behave better. And so you can have this huge success without having hyper Bitcoinization. And I tend to think that this will happen in some cases. There will be some central banks and governments who see what's happening, and they will be smart enough to realize, oh, we need to behave better, or we're going to be toast. And I think that would be a huge success for Bitcoin. It would be a feather in Bitcoin's cap.
I mean, I have no doubt that that's going to happen on the road to obsoleting all central banks. So, I mean, good luck. So, I have a question for you. Do you know what the like strategically in like the 90s, what's the difference between Google's search engine and Yahoo?
Yeah. So, I read this book called How the Internet Happened or something like that. Have you read this book?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So When Yahoo was getting started with their search engine, they had scores of people manually constructing their own database of the internet. And so they weren't using an algorithm like the PageRank algorithm that Google was using. They were doing it by hand, which is insane to think of. So why do you think this is relevant?
Yeah. So you're saying that central banks, aka the Yahoo strategy, is going to compete with Bitcoin, aka the Google strategy.
Yeah.
Like there's no chance. They have no chance. This is analog monetary policy versus programmatic monetary policy and cryptographic validation enforcement. Like they have no competitive chance, in my opinion. And I just Yahoo had no chance. They were wrecked from day one.
Yeah,
they couldn't hire enough people.
I agree, and I walked right into that one, by the way. But you don't think there would be one central bank to say, look, we need a constant rate, one that we can't change in response to what?
I call that hyper Bitcoinization, because what are they going to peg that rate against?
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible.
I don't know.
What timeline do you put on this?
You probably gonna disagree with this, but I think the next 10 years, the world's a different place.
Because we mostly denominate in Bitcoin everywhere. Is that the idea?
I feel like borders will have changed significantly. People will have endured a lot, and we'll be entering kind of a new time, a new cycle at the end of that. So I don't know. I personally think that this, the Roaring 20s is going to be a hell of a ride, and Bitcoin is the winner at the end of that.
No, I agree that the 20s are going to be insane. And I think this is possible, but 10 years would be fast. But I mean, the last few years have been very fast, and especially this last year. Hold on to your seat because things have been absolutely blowing by. Even just the last few months, I cannot believe how things have gone. Like today. I mean, so this will date the podcast.
Yeah, hit me. You're asking me about what news I cared about today. What news do you care about today?
I care about the Tesla news.
Tesla, March 24th.
Yes. So Tesla announced today that they will be, that Elon will be selling Teslas for Bitcoin. Okay. Why is that important? Well, Tesla is hacking Bitcoin's limited supply in ways maybe I should have imagined, but I hadn't imagined. And here's why. They already hold a ton of Bitcoin. The hodlers who will be paying Bitcoin for Tesla, they hodl Bitcoin, of course. So what's the winning play here? Well, if you're wealthy enough to buy a Tesla, you're wealthy enough not to buy Tesla out of your hodl stash. You can either get a USD loan on the Bitcoin that you hold, or you can just either take a loan out of the USD that you have, or just pay in cash. Okay, so suppose you have that disposable cash from either a Bitcoin loan or just sitting in your bank account. Buy Bitcoin with it, and then transfer that Bitcoin to Tesla, so that every hodler who does this and buys a Tesla takes a Tesla's worth of Bitcoin off the market. That helps Bitcoin appreciate. That's already sitting on the balance sheet of Tesla and in the Bitcoin addresses of the hodlers. So what they've grabbed here is a way to help increase Bitcoin's price. The price of the Bitcoin that they already have. by accepting more Bitcoin. It's a kind of virtuous feedback loop. It's self-reinforcing. It's the self-reinforcing nature of the move that to me is genius. And it makes me think that there are other ways to do this maybe that I just haven't thought of. And I'm just out
Craig,
of words. Yes.
Satoshi really understood human incentives.
Yes.
And
true.
I mean, like, I think you just walk through, what Tesla's doing on a really, really like zoomed out lens. But like ultimately, those incentives exist for literally everyone that values Bitcoin, and
That's right.
everyone that values Bitcoin living in a world where there is 0% interest rate, super cheap fiat debt.
Yes.
It creates the incentive and the unstoppable urge to speculative attack or borrow against the weaker currency and buy the more expensive one.
Yeah, that's right. And so I hadn't really thought of it this way, but what Tesla's doing is what hodlers have been doing for years. They take Bitcoin off the market, hoping that, with less Bitcoin on the market, the Bitcoin that they've already taken off the market will increase in value. It's just the way the scale that it's happening now with MicroStrategy and Tesla is unimaginable.
And it's just the beginning, folks. It is just the beginning. Craig, I had a lot of fun on this conversation, man. This was a lot more wide-ranging than I had anticipated, but I think the listeners are going to really enjoy this one. I want to give you one to give a last word. Like, if you could tell the Bitcoin Magazine audience anything, what would you say?
Yeah. So, we didn't really talk much philosophy. You're right. It was very wide ranging. I really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on. If you'd like some papers that are philosophical but accessible, go to Resistance.money. And I and Bradley Rettler and Andrew Bailey would love to chat about Bitcoin and philosophy with you. And so we hope to be writing more and more as Bitcoin continues to go up.
Well, you guys got to do some philosophy clubhouses or something. I feel like there's something there.
Yeah. So have you been on Clubhouse recently?
And I've been running it for Bitcoin Magazine.
Oh man. Okay. So I kind of been out of the loop for a few weeks here, but yeah, we would love to do that.
Well, hey, let's talk offline, and maybe we can help coordinate something. Maybe we can host. And I guess, Craig, where can people, other than Resistance.money, where can people learn more about you and kind of get in touch with you or see your Twitter feed?
Oh, sure. So my Twitter account is just my name, Craig Warmke, Warmke, and my full name is also my website. So if you Google me, you'll find me, and I'd be glad to hear from you.
All right, awesome. Well, Craig, I had a lot of fun on this conversation. Really wide ranging. Bitcoiners, we usually agree on the things that matter, but we don't necessarily agree on forecasting. So it's always fun to go back and forth and get extra cosmic. To all the listeners out there, make sure to go follow Craig. Make sure to go check out Resistance.money. Make sure to go follow me at CK_Snarks. Go follow Bitcoin Magazine and give us those 5-star reviews. They really mean a lot. The show is growing really fast, so appreciate all the Bitcoiners out there listening. Peace.